Welcome to the American University Museum at the Katzen Art Center. You are in the project space of the museum, and the project space, we conceived of it as a way to sort of cut across campus to involve different departments in what we do over here. And in this case, this was seen as sort of a way of bringing the School of Communication over into the art sphere, and there's certainly no better person to do that than Bob Schieffer. So we get to have a conversation with Bob, and I'm not going to give you a long introduction because it could go on and on.
Well, feel free to.
Yeah, I know. And so, but we want to have a conversation, so we'll talk a little bit, and then feel free to sort of get my attention, and we'll try to get you a microphone, and we will then have questions from the audience, okay? So enjoy. I just met you when did we start working on this? Is it about a year ago?
Yeah, somewhere.
2 years ago?
Time flies.
Wow. Sure does. So, but I remember going over to your apartment, I can't even remember who told me about you. But
Leslie Duncan.
Okay.
There's a fine arts dealer here.
Yeah, so she said, oh, you really got to go see Bob Schieffer and what he's doing. And I thought, oh, sure, why not? And it was such a wonderful surprise to walk into your apartment and see how he'd taken over the place. and was doing this amazing work, and so my first question would be, of course, when did this happen? I mean, why did it happen, and how did it happen?
Well, I'll tell you, the number one, the key to all this is my wife has a great sense of humor, and this is Pat. She's down here, and I'm going to stand up. So, in early 2020, when the first COVID scare was coming about, and I had a couple of friends who were reporters, one of whom, who's for her first job out of college, was working as my assistant at CBS, and her name's Kaylee Hartung, and she's now the West Coast correspondent for the Today Show. And then on Thursdays does Thursday Night Football for Amazon. So Kaylee was one of the first reporters that got sent out to Washington State when those nursing homes, when the COVID stuff started happening. And we knew so little about that in those days that the reporters didn't even know they were supposed to wear masks of any kind. And a lot of them, including Kaylee, got very sick, and I decided right then that this is something that we're going to be talking about and thinking about for a long time. And I could even see in those days that this was going to involve more than just people who got COVID. This was already beginning to impact on our culture. Walt Mossberg, who's a technology columnist, told me one time, he said, sometimes people don't realize how serious or dangerous or just how deep something is running and the impact it's having on their lives until after they experience it. And I decided that's when I wanted to document what had happened during the COVID era, which, as we now know, did come to involve a whole lot more than just people who got sick during the pandemic. I think when I really realized how much of an impact it was having, I saw the cover of Vogue International, and it had two people wearing masks kissing on the cover, and I thought, this really is changing things. This really is changing things. And it was hitting people of all ages. And You know, I'd like to just say something here at the start. One of the things that people ask me so much is, do you think that Donald Trump and Joe Biden are too old to be president? And my answer is, I don't know, but I'll tell you one thing, I'd give anything to be 80 again, because that was a long time ago for me, 7 years ago. And I think I'm going to win the Grandma Moses Prize for the oldest person to have his first art show at age 87. So here I am, but you can mark that down as a historical event there. But it's been an amazing thing for me, and I really started painting back then in those early days. And the way this exhibit is set up is that back wall there is everything that happened before January 6th. And one of the first things that happened was the trouble they had out in Michigan, where there were plots to kidnap the governor. There were people, armed people coming into the state capitol. It just really was a very dangerous and almost a scary time. And so that was really what I put on that wall as one of the first things. As you walk back toward the elevator here, you will see there's a painting based on the front page of the New York Times on, I think it was May 15th, 2022. And that's when we knew how serious this really was officially, because the Times published their headline was 1 million Americans had died of COVID by that time. And that's how serious it was. Just the COVID and not knowing what to do about that, when of all things, a policeman put his knee on the neck of George there, and we saw him literally die on television. And that gave you an idea that the Black Lives Matter movement, it was just sort of, people were in a bad humor, they were not feeling good about anything, they were worried about where COVID was going. And then when this happened, we understood that this was going even deeper. And so that was the reason that I painted that. The next one, as we were going through those years, I began to wonder, have we forgotten all of the things that happened during the civil rights movement? Are we refighting the Civil War here again? All of a sudden, we were seeing people demonstrating. I remember during on the 50th anniversary of the Selma March, I went down to Selma and walked across the bridge with John Lewis, who is one of my heroes. And he told me something that I will never forget. He said he was the first person hit. A cop walked up and just hit him in the head with a billy club, and then proceeded to beat him after that. And he told me that he passed out and he woke up, and by that time they had taken him to a hospital, and he thought he was dead. He thought he had already died. He didn't have any idea how he got. And I kept thinking about that. Are we forgetting about that? Are we challenging that again? And in some quarters, we absolutely were. But the Black Lives Matter people, they certainly knew what those days meant, because they began plastering all the statues through the South of Confederate leaders. And most of those, a lot of people don't stop and think about it, most of those statues were put up long after the Civil War. They were put up by people in the days that were happening then. So I made that part of it. The next picture, you may recognize this person. This is one of the strangest events that I've ever covered. in the sense that the Black Lives Matter people had been demonstrating out in that area, and they told them to leave. They didn't know why they were being told to leave. Finally, they had to use tear gas to clear the way. And after they had done that, the President of the United States came walking around the corner. He walked over to St. John's Church, and I think most of you here know where that is, right across Lafayette Square, and stopped and held up a Bible. He didn't say anything. He just held up the Bible, and someone hollered, "Is that your Bible?" And he said, "It's a Bible." Then he put the Bible down and went back to the White House. And it was just simply a photo opportunity with no information. See, maybe he knew what he was aiming for, but whatever, that's what happened. The next one is again Lafayette Square, and I took two pictures from the Washington Post. One of the crowds that came after Biden won, and then the picture, I call this one the bump. It's Biden and Barack Obama bumping elbows there. And I just thought putting those two pictures together sort of just showed the joy that was being felt by so many people in that square that night, where there'd been so many demonstrations before. And then the next one, of course, is January 6th. I call it Caligula's drop-by. And I know all of you remember that Caligula was the mad emperor of Rome who made his horse a member of the Roman Senate. Or at least that's the story they tell. So I thought that was a good title for seeing these people. And I want to tell you something about this. When this happened, I just sat down in front of my television to watch Biden going to be, well, no, he was not. I sat down in front of my television to watch Trump. He was speaking, and this was where he said he was going to march down to the Capitol with all the people and stuff. And at first, it never dawned on me that these people were trying to overthrow the government. I thought they'd just broken in there, trying to get selfies and things like that. But the more I watched, the more unbelievable it became to me. And I just kept thinking. I mean, to me, the United States Capitol and what it stands for is kind of the holy place of American politics, in the same way that the Sistine Chapel is sort of the holy place for religious people. And it offended me. That's what I thought about it, my first reaction. I was offended that these clowns and hooligans would be coming in there and, in some cases, defecating in the hallways, beating people up with boards and flagpoles. It was just beyond me. I couldn't believe it. I had never seen anything like this in my life, and I don't think I ever would. But to me, it was like somebody who defecated in the Sistine Chapel. It was all part of a piece, and so that's sort of the way I viewed that. Now, the next one you can see just around the corner, and that is the poet, I call it. This is Amanda Duncan, the Youth Poet Laureate, and she spoke at the Biden inaugurations, and her poem ended, "The light is always there, if only we are brave enough to see it, if only we are brave enough to be it." And it was at that moment that I said, these paintings I'm working on, I'm going to call this exhibit Looking for the Light. And I still think it's well named. And what a remarkable young woman she is. And one of the things I've tried to bring before you in this exhibit is this was a difficult, dangerous, very difficult and very dangerous period and juncture in history that we're going through right now. But we also saw the passing during this time of some very wonderful, outstanding citizens. And I guess if I was going to, somebody said, what do you hope to accomplish here? I would say this is a plea for civility that I hope I have put together here. We have created politics in this country that are so obscene, so awful, so expensive, that our best and brightest people want no part of it. You know, when I was a little boy, my grandmother, who taught me to paint, thought I would grow up to be president of the United States. You know why she thought that? Because that's what every grandmother thought her grandson was going to grow up to be. I'll ask you this question. How long has it been since you've heard anybody say, I sure hope my son or daughter grows up to be a politician? You don't see that. You don't hear that very much anymore. And that, when we talk about how do we somehow come out of all this, the first thing we've got to do is figure out some way to sort of put the damper on so much negativity that we're seeing in our politics for so long now. You know, if all an alien from outer space came to Earth and he was in the middle of a campaign and all he knew about our politics was what he saw in the television ads, what do you think he would think that this people who inhabit this planet, what are they really like? The positivity, the efforts to bring people together, that's kind of been put on hold while we're in the midst of this period where the idea seems to be how can we divide people rather than how can we bring them together. And so that really is what this exhibit is all about. Okay? Would anybody at this point, while I catch my breath, like to ask a question?
Yes,
Yes.
hold on one second.
Thank you, Mr. Schieffer. I'm an amateur historian, and around March 15th, 2020, I thought COVID would have an impact on world society that equaled that of September 11th. And about a week later, I thought it would be more like, the impact of COVID on world society would be more like World War II. Everything today, I believe, is different. Do you agree with that assessment, or would you take that a step further? And what would you see as a historical precedent for us to look back on to reassure ourselves that things do improve, things do get better?
Well, we have been through very serious problems before. And one of the reasons that I painted this picture on this wall, Roosevelt, Lincoln, and George Washington, who I think are our three greatest presidents. And each of them, during their own terms in office, faced problems and challenges far greater than the problems that we are facing today. I don't mean to play down the problems we're facing, but stop and think about it. You know, when you're my age, I can remember when World War II was going on. Hitler was marching across Europe. I was born in 1937. He was preparing to go across Europe. He had already solidified his support back home. So, I mean, I have to say, in all honesty, and again, not trying to denigrate what were the difficulties we've had today, the most significant event in my life, in my lifetime, is World War II. Is World War II. Think about that. George Washington took on the greatest military power of the day with a group of soldiers that some of whom didn't even have shoes. But he didn't do that by trying to rewrite history or to play down the problems or tell people that were opposed to what he had in mind that they were crazy or not patriots. Abraham Lincoln, the country came apart, but he found a way to start putting it back together. Think about that when you think about serious things that we've managed to overcome. And Roosevelt. If Roosevelt had not won the war that he was given to fight, the world would have entered a new dark age. There's no question about that. And again, that is why I think when we think about what we're going through, it's good to think about folks like that, and I'll talk a little about people on this corner over here in a minute.
I was gonna mention your wall of heroes. You know, this isn't a entirely negative assessment of humanity. This is
I really, this was the part I really enjoyed doing. And the poor people that died during this period, which I think we need to remember and remember what they said, as well as some of these yahoos that we also find crowding the airwaves. John McCain. John McCain is one of the greatest and bravest people that I have ever been around in my life. And he was not afraid to take on anybody. And why should he have been? After 5.5 years in an enemy prison, and he refused to leave unless they let the people that had been in there longer than he had out first. He stayed. Think about that and what he did. I have to tell you, I love the guy. And I got to know him very well over the years. And one time, we were on a commercial flight, and we hit it together. We were sitting together, and I mean, it scared me to death. And I've ridden a lot of airplanes in my life. It's not like that was my first flight. But McCain looked over at me and he said, "Don't worry. If I was going to die in an airplane, I'd already be dead." And that's the way he was. He never took himself seriously. And then Sandra Day O'Connor back there, she did not object in the least to being called the cowgirl on the court. She came from a ranching family appointed by Ronald Reagan and she was from out in Arizona. And we did not know her well, but we knew some people that knew her, and every so often we'd be at social events with them. And she was one of the toughest questioners on the court. And I was sitting next to her once, and I played golf, and I knew she played golf, and so I turned the subject to golf. And you know, one of the things in golf, you never ask someone what their handicap is. That's just kind of an impolite thing to do. And she said, "Do you play golf?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I do." And she said, "What's your handicap?" And I said, "Well, it's probably about 10 or 12. She said, "Well, can you play to it?" And sometimes that kind of hard edge would actually, you'd hear that coming off the bench. But she was the kindest and gentlest person. She used to have lunches for sometimes her friends' families, and would cook the food herself at home and bring it to the Supreme Court. And people just, she was just a really nice person. But she's a tough cookie too, I'll tell you. And she was a fine, I guess, somebody wrote that during her time in the court, nearly everything that happened got her approval. And if it was a good thing. John Lewis, I mean, as I've already said, someone I have just ultimate respect for, and who never stopped fighting for rights for black people. He never stopped till the day he died. And then finally, the only one of those four that I didn't know or hadn't met personally was Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And she was everything to women's rights that John Lewis was to the rights of black Americans. And I sometimes wonder if young women of today really understand and appreciate how much she did for women's rights. It was just unbelievable what she was able to do. And you know, under this thing, well, Republicans can be friends of Democrats and all that kind of thing that seems to be the vote today. She got along fine with the people who were on total opposite sides in the arguments that she took part in as a justice. I really have the utmost respect for her. Yes, sir.
I'm Peter Mayer. I worked with Bob at CBS News, and Bob has always been my hero. When I was hired at CBS, that was one of the best things to be able to say that I worked in the same news organization with you, Bob. I think everybody would agree that you've given us a new way to look at these faces of the nation. That was a play on
That's a good one. I like that.
And I'm wondering...
I'll use that at the next one.
Please do. You have my permission. Bob, I'm wondering just two questions. I have a lot of them, but there are others here. Number one, could you walk us through the process of when you get an idea of a rendering of Putin or the president of Ukraine, from the idea in your wonderful brain to bringing it to canvas, how that process works? And my second question is, could you enlighten us about your collaboration with another hero, Michael Beschloss, of curating this wonderful exhibit?
Well, Michael he was so complimentary. I hadn't expected it. I've known Michael for years. And when I asked him to do this curation, and he said yes, he'd be happy to. And he was in the middle of writing yet another book himself. So this was kind of additional duty for him, but he did it. And he's someone I really respect. The work he did on LBJ, for example, and those, he really added to it. Yeah, what was the other?
The process.
Oh, the process. Well, oddly enough, the one of Putin here, I didn't sign this one, and the reason I didn't is I have no idea who painted that the first time around. I just found it like I did most of the things, and I think in a magazine or somewhere. But all I know is that hundreds of the protesters in Kyiv carried these. This was the sign that they carried. So I don't know who made the original design, but I hope they don't mind if I help them spread the message, I guess is the way.
Just the process in general, Bob. When
But-
you get an idea and just bringing it to canvas, how does that work?
Most of the ideas I got just from reading the newspaper. I used to be a newspaper reporter before I came to CBS, and I just always read the paper. It's generational, and I'm doing my best to get used to online, and I guess I will. I mean, when they stopped writing on scrolls and switched to the first printing presses, the people got used to it, but it took a while. And so that's kind of where I am. I mean, I am totally illiterate online. I don't do social media. I never have. I always thought when I got a story, it belonged to CBS News. And once it got on CBS News, then on to something else. But I never, this whole idea of getting it first, but it doesn't necessarily have to be right, is not my idea of what a good reporter does. And somebody asked me, said, well, do you feel like you're an activist now? And the answer is no. I'm a journalist, and I still consider myself a journalist, but I do not believe by saying that journalists are stenographers. I think doing a story, getting it right, it doesn't have to be from a certain point of view. I mean, my idea is if you get the right facts and put them together, people will come to their own conclusions. And that's what I've always felt. I never felt, I guess, in all the years that I was at CBS, and I did weekly commentaries on the radio first, and then later on Face the Nation. I never thought I was going to convince somebody to just change their mind. I thought it would be successful if I got them to think to themselves, I really never thought of it that way before. And if I got that kind of a reaction, I thought that was a good thing for me. Let me go down here. This is Uvalde. And when those stories first came on television, I called the editor, the chief photographer, Charles Luna, of the Uvalde newspaper, and I was asking about this. And he had taken a picture of this girl in the blue dress. And as I kept going through it in my mind, trying to figure out how I wanted to do a story about this, a painting, I thought, I know that girl from somewhere. I know that. And then I got to thinking, and I thought, oh, I know what it is. She's making the same gesture, as we call it in art. She's making the same gesture as the napalm girl did in the iconic photo from Vietnam. This is based on a photo taken by Nick Utt, who was a combat photographer for the Associated Press when I was in Vietnam. His brother had been killed, and he was a photographer also. But he had done this remarkable picture, and I thought, it's the same. They're doing the same thing. And to me, what that painting, what I'm trying to say in that painting is that no matter what it is that the adults get us into, it's the children who always pay the greatest price. And this child was bombed by napalm because she was in the wrong place. This child was in the right place. She was in school where she should have been, and yet we were unable to protect her. And that led me to this. This is kind of our war on what to do about keeping children safe. Am I next? That's the question the kids were answering. But this one here says, Shopper's Guide, Sympathy Cards, Aisle 6. And that is kind of where we are in dealing with the #1 killer of teenagers and children in America. We send a sympathy card, say thoughts and prayers, and then we sit back and wait for the next one of these things to happen. I don't have any particular, well, I have several things I think we could be doing, including background checks at gun shows, but we have got to find a better way to deal with it. Whatever it is we're doing now, no matter what anybody says, is simply not enough because it keeps happening over and over again. Anybody else? Right here.
The Wall Street Journal recently had an article on a lot of controversy in the New York Times newsroom about that there's sort of a battle going on the balance of coverage between Gaza and Israel, and the publisher almost said, I'm trying to legislate a balance there, and how do you see that working out in modern news organizations?
Well, I tell you what I think is going on. I think that's happening in most newsrooms now. People trying to figure out what is the balance here. How do we do that? And that's a good thing, because that's why the idea that a lot of people like to live at home now, and that's fine. I mean, I think it's just fine for some people. But what really makes a news organization energetic is when they're all in the same place. And there's nothing more fun than being in the middle of a newsroom and being there with your colleagues. And you can imagine people are, making fun of your story. I remember I made a mistake one time at CBS, and there must have been 10 of us that were sitting there watching the evening news in Washington. And what I'd said was that somebody was on tender hooks. Well, it's tenor hooks is how they never let me forget it. I was tender hooks Bob from there on in. But that's what makes it fun. But also, serious people have questions. Serious people don't always agree, and sometimes one view prevails and sometimes another. When I was growing up, I was taught that what a newspaper does is give you the news you want to know and the news you need to know. And the more serious the newspaper is when it puts the balance toward what you need to know. And so I think that's both good and bad, what they're doing. But I think a lot of organizations are going through much the same thing. What the more serious problem is we have fewer and fewer newspapers. That's what the real problem is. I mean, the local newspaper used to be where most of us got the information that we used to live our lives. What time did we need to get the kids to school? What are the taxes? Did we forget to pay the water bill? Those are the things that local newspapers brought to us. And now, every day another one closes. They're just simply, nobody has yet found the economic format, or whatever you want to call it, to keep them in business, because they're, where they used to make their money on the local ads, that's now gone away to the internet. And that's the real and most serious problem that we have.
So your comment about Caligula appointing his horse as a cabinet member did kind of make me wonder which of Trump's family members you consider to be the horse. But most of the things that
I didn't mean that.
I didn't say that.
I just...
The three presidents story, there was a long lead into the American Revolution, a really long lead into the Civil War, fairly long lead into World War II. For a lot of us, we saw the rise of Trump as something totally unexpected, not a long lead. Do you have an idea for why things changed so quickly right at that point?
Well, you can argue about what does Donald Trump know a lot about and what does he not know very much about. But I'll tell you something he knows a lot about, and that is television. He knows how to get people to watch him on television. And in the 2016 campaign, there used to be a political consultant, his name escapes me now, but he said, let's say you're having a dinner party and everybody's talking about different things, and then all of a sudden somebody throws a dead cat on the middle of the table. Suddenly, the whole conversation turns to, what are we going to do about this cat? And I think Donald Trump did a version of that in this sense. And there's nothing illegal about it. He'd get up in the morning and start calling radio stations and newspapers and television stations and saying, you know, I'm available if anybody needs to talk to me. Well, if you call enough television and radio stations, you're going to get somebody who's going to tell you, yeah, we'd love to have you, come on over. And so, and he would always schedule them in the morning. Then he would go, and then he would say something, usually controversial, and the whole campaign for the rest of the day would be people reacting to what he said, not about what the issues might happen to be. And he just parlayed that into win. And Hillary Clinton, who I like very much, I think she was a wonderful senator from New York, and I wasn't sure she was going to be, but she represented her constituents well. They were running an old-fashioned campaign where you don't let your candidate say, come on, face the nation, because you don't have control on what questions are going to be asked. They kept her in a safe place, and while they were keeping her in a safe place, that's when Trump was calling up yet another TV station and finding a way to get on television again. I think one of the mistakes that the networks certainly learned from that is they probably gave him too much time. I am one of those who believes the more you put them on television, the more you can find out about them. I'm not particularly one who said they gave him too much time, but it worked for him, and I think that's how he got to the Oval Office. Yes, sir.
First, I just want to say how much I enjoyed your excellent discussions at the CSIS think tank for many years. We were so lucky to have you at DuPont Circle.
I loved it. It's a great place.
You did a wonderful job for that. But since we're at American University's campus and a new precedent where there was quite a bit of protest, I guess, on something on free speech, what are your thoughts on that whole campus environment and Columbia University, the arrest of students there?
I wish I had an answer to this, but this is a very serious thing, and I really don't have an answer. I think campuses and universities are obliged to let both sides be heard and encouraged. But by the same token, I don't endorse anyone getting up and announcing that Hamas did a good thing when they killed all those Israelis. But it's a really difficult thing. You know, I think, and one of the things I've come to understand is, I think leadership at universities is one of the toughest kinds of leadership assignments a person can get. I mean, when you stop and think about the constituencies that every university president has to satisfy. Number one, the students, then the faculty, then the alumni, and then the local community where that university is located. And when you stop and think about that, that's a tough job to get all those people steered in the right direction, and yet it's being done. I'm very proud. I went to TCU, and they've done a really wonderful job, but this is something that's going to continue to be a problem, and I wish I had a better answer than I'm giving you here, but that's my thought on it.
Very different question for you. Let's talk about art. You're at any university, you're at the Katzen Art Center, you're showing with 10 young people who are all born in the 21st century, and you're all kind of doing the same thing, in a way. I'm wondering if you had any conversations with them, because I knew you had the opening together. I was wondering if there was any interaction.
Just keep at it. It's just like anything else you do. I mean, you know, when the young people would come to work at CBS, I'd say show up on time, answer the phone, and be available when you can help. And people would say, well, what is the dress code? And I'd say, there is no dress code, but if the president calls me, I don't think he will, but he might. If he calls me and tells me to come over to the White House, and I want to take you, I don't want you to have to wait till you go home and change clothes. So dress appropriately. But that has nothing to do with art. But I just think it's, keep doing it, because a lot of people think they can't draw. Well, they can draw better than they think they can. They just haven't drawn enough. I just think you just have to keep at it, take advice, go to people that you think know more about it than you do. They probably can help you, maybe they can, but they may give you some ideas. But I think art is wonderful. I mean, I've just always loved it, but I always loved being a reporter. You know, I think if you pick out something that you really love, it doesn't seem like work. So that's a pretty good place to be, where you're not working but doing something you still love, and that's what keeps me going. I mean, I've just always been this way. I think most of the time when I start out painting or do something, I'm always trying to do something to see if I can do it. That's what motivates me, just to see if I can do it. And you know, sometimes I can and sometimes I can't, but I wouldn't have done much of anything if I hadn't just given it a try. I did want to point out over here, this is my self-portrait that is a parody, of course, of Norman Rockwell's famous self-portrait. And I liked Norman Rockwell when it wasn't cool. Now you got people like George Lewis and Spielberg. They actually collect his work, and I think it was Spielberg that said he's a one-frame storyteller, and he certainly was, and there was nothing like him. But the thing that I always remember is that his work was the first artist work that I recognized that it came from him. And I was still a little boy, and my parents subscribed to the Saturday Evening Post where so many of his paintings appeared. And I couldn't wait for it to get there to see the painting. So I've added that just as kind of a tribute to him, because I think he is one of the, sometimes in many quarters, unappreciated, but certainly had a popular following then and still does.
We have time for a few more questions, I think. Want to bring that over here? Right here. There you go.
I'm going to follow up Bruce's question. Marty Baron, I think known to everybody in this room, when he was asked once, why did you see Trump coming? And he said, in 2016, I don't think we or any other major newspaper saw it coming. So recently I asked him, why did you miss Trump? And we were on live television without missing a beat. He said, because we stopped covering people who have to choose between paying the rent and paying for food. Do you think he's right? And do you think that's changed since you and I worked together at CBS 40, 50 years ago?
That it's all about the economy?
He missed covering people who had to choose between paying the rent and paying for food. So stop covering non-affluent people.
Yeah, I think so. Good. Yeah.
I'd love to know, you obviously had a wonderful career sharing information and perspective, and now you've gone into art sharing perspective and information. where do you hope this exhibit goes next? You've had a wonderful start showing at American University, which I think is the perfect launch pad for you here in Washington. Where else would you hope other people get exposed through your art to what you're trying to share?
I think I'm just going to keep doing this for a while, till I get tired of doing it. I've got to do something to make it up to Pat. I literally, we have this beautiful dining room, and we have a little balcony at one end, and I just sort of confiscated that. And I sold her on the fact you won't have to cook so much anymore because we won't be able to entertain as much as we used to. But she was kind enough and good enough to help me do that. So I've still got, I think I painted for this show maybe 40 paintings, and there's 25 here. So I may try to figure out something else to do with some of those, and some of them are not that good, but they didn't get it. It was mercy killing. But I'm fascinated with it, and every time I make a painting, I find something that I didn't know, that I figured out, or that I, read about. When I first started painting, when I kind of switched over from drawing, and by the way, the Lincoln back there, I drew it. It's a drawing, a graphite drawing, and I painted that in 1983, and I kind of didn't want people to think I just suddenly started doing this, so it's in there. But it's still one of my very favorite things. I'm real proud of it. But Jack's been pretty nice to me, and first person invited me to have a full show all my own, so he's right there. I'm going to put him on this wall over here next.
We have time for maybe a few more. This gentleman here.
Thank you for hosting us. Congratulations, Bob, on your
There you are.
your series. Have you done any paintings on your beloved Lone Star State?
On what?
On Texas. And who are your favorite political cartoonists? Oliphant?
Herb Block, but he's
Block.
not here anymore. The guy from the Post. And yeah, I've done some. I've got a kind of some cowboy paintings, and I've got one of somebody gave me some boots, and I made a painting out of that, and I got a kick out of that. I grew up on the north side of Fort Worth, where the stockyards are, and so in that day we didn't talk about country music. We talked about music because that was the only music we had out that part of town, and so I was always I love country music, and wrote a couple of songs along the way. Did I tell you I was at the Grand Ole? I was on the Grand Ole Opry one time too, just if you want to fill out the resume, which no one believes that, but it's actually true. Well, are we?
Yeah, I'm really excited about your coming concert. You're gonna take your next career.
I think I learned my
Recital
lesson.
hall right over there.
Well, I want to thank you all. It's so nice of people to come out for something like this. I mean, I always feel great, and I'm complimented when somebody says, I saw a painting you did, or I heard a commentary, I thought that was good. And that always makes you feel good. But today is especially, it makes me feel very good to think that people didn't have to come. They got in their cars, they drove over here just to see some paintings that I had made. And that really does make me feel good. So I want to thank each and every one of you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Well, I took your photo next to your Ukrainian series.